Welcome back, guys. In today's video, we're looking at 5 sell-high wide receivers in our opinions based on their landing spots, if they've changed through free agency, their scheme fits, any new additions to the roster, any coaching changes, anything like that, and their overall market value. Stay tuned for the all 5 sell-high wide receivers, and I think you'll be quite surprised on who we have in here. All right, well, let's get the first one out of the way first, the big one. We're going with Puka Nacua as our first sell-high wide receiver for a few reasons, right? If you look at his Dynasty value over the past year, this is per keep trade cut, you see it's never been higher than what it is right now, which is kind of confusing just based off of how good his rookie season was and he was healthy. This year, he finished as the wide receiver 26. He was banged up a good portion of the year. He went on IR at one point. This isn't new news to people, especially if you did any draft scouting for his draft class. You know, when he was coming out of BYU, he was hurt all the time. So this is something that's not new to us. And there's the news that just came out with him about wanting to retire before he was 30 or around the age of 30, which he's 24 right now. That doesn't really have a big impact on him right now, but let's say 3 or 4 years down the road, right? People aren't going to want to trade for this guy because they're going to be like, well, he's only playing 2 or 3 more years. So you get that kind of Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey type argument when you're trying to trade him, right? And that would probably tank his value a little bit. But this is the confusing point. You see his value has never been higher than what it is right now, and he's coming off injuries. And he's shown in the past that he can't stay healthy. He had the one good year where he wasn't hurt very much in his rookie season. He put up great numbers. I will say this is kind of a ballsy pick here because if he is healthy for an entire season, he's got high wide receiver 1 upside. But him going as like the wide receiver 4 or 5 in startups just is not for me at all. I would trade him. And you'll see exactly what people are getting for him in just a second. So before we get into the trades that you see before you, we're going to go over the roster real quick. So there is one big addition. 2 little bits of news, right? Matthew Stafford came back, which is good. We don't like Jimmy Garoppolo being the starter, right? We'd rather have Matthew Stafford, who is a pretty high volume thrower in this Rams offense. But you notice they got rid of Cooper Kupp, who didn't really play much anyways just because he was hurt all the time, and they traded him for a vertical X type of receiver that can also play the Z, Davante Adams, which would probably kick Puka Nacua out to the slot a good bit. This is probably going to hurt Puka Nacua's overall upside, right? Because Davante Adams, we know in the past, has demanded targets on top of targets on top of targets. So Puka Nacua is probably going to have his value hurting this year if Davante Adams can stay on the field consistently. Now, I looked at the trade database on Keep Trade Cut and just looked at some of the more recent trades for Puka Nacua. And as of today, you can get ridiculous value for Puka Nacua. And in my opinion, I'm probably doing all 3 of these trades. So Puka Nacua for the 2025 101, which translates basically into Ashton Genty, but I would say the 101 is slightly more valuable than Ashton Genty just because in certain leagues, the guy at 101 could want a quarterback really bad. So the 101 is just a little bit more versatile than Ashton Genty, but still I would take the 101 or Ashton Genty for Puka Nacua right now. Another trade was Puka Nacua for a late first and a 2026 first. Taking that all day long, even if I'm a contending team. He just isn't consistent enough for me due to the injuries. Now, if he stays on the field 12, 13 games this year, which I doubt, he'll be worth 2 firsts. But selling Puka Nacua for 2 firsts right now I can't decline that. And then the last trade here is Puka Nacua and the 401, which doesn't mean very much, for Bijan Robinson, who is the Dynasty RB1 in a lot of people's opinions. Doing that all day long. Bijan's showed that he can hold up for the workhorse load. You know, he's looking like he's just going to be more and more part of that Falcons offense. So all 3 of those trades for certain I'm smashing accepting on. So, yeah, you see, Puka Nacua can get you a lot of value right now if you're a little scared about the Devontae Adams pickup or his injury concerns. And then next on the list, we got Jerry Jeudy, a guy that put together a fantastic season for himself last year. Basically, off of a few pretty ridiculous games for him and Jameis Winston, right? So, he was overall very solid this year. He was the wide receiver 12 this year, so that's awesome. Very good production out of him. But you look at his dynasty value, you see it has skyrocketed over the past year. And it just seems like a classic, just ship him off at his highest value. And I would agree with that. Just because of the roster situation in Cleveland right now, it is not very good. You'll see the quarterback situation. I think the only quarterback they have on the roster right now is Kenny Pickett. I don't know what's going to happen there at all. So, Jerry Jeudy, I think this is his best season that he's going to have. I would ship him off for something, and we'll get into the trades in just a moment. So before we get into the trades, let's go ahead and look at the Browns offense real quick. So we have Deshaun Watson, who's going to miss a significant amount of time next year just because of the Achilles re-injury. And then we have Kenny Pickett, who has been vastly underwhelming the entirety of his career, specifically in Pittsburgh. He was decent in some of his starts with Philly. Obviously, if you looked on X whenever he was playing, he had one of the worst throws I've ever seen at a quarterback. I mean, he just threw it and he just kind of fell out of his hands. It was kind of hilarious. In terms of running backs, they're going to have to go a running back in the draft. Jerome Ford's just not a consistent option at running back. And then when you look at the wide receivers, there's basically no competition for him outside of Cedric Tillman and David Njoku, who is also hurt all the time. Jamari Thrash has been terrible with the very limited amount of targets that he's gotten. Cedric Tillman is, he had a few big-time games last year with Jameis, I think, but outside of that and then DTR, for some reason, loved him as well. I don't think Deshaun or Kenny Pickett is going to give a big season out of any of these pass catchers, and Jeudy, unfortunately, is one of these guys. I think Jerry Jeudy's talented, but there's no way. If these are the quarterbacks they roll out with, maybe they draft Shedeur Sanders. I don't even think Shedeur Sanders is the best quarterback in this locker room. If he gets drafted at number 2, I'd rather Kenny Pickett trot out there. He's not going to finish higher than the wide receiver 12 next year. And that's basically what you're getting him at in terms of trade value. So, looking at the trades, you can trade Jerry Jeudy in the 110 right now for Garrett Wilson. Smash accept. You're vastly upgrading your wide receiver room when you're going from Jerry Jeudy to Garrett Wilson. Doing that all day. Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Hyatt, who's basically an afterthought in this trade, for Joe Milton, who's a high upside backup in my opinion, and then the 203 and the 204. 2 seconds and a quarterback that might do something. I doubt it. For Jerry Jeudy and Jalen Hyatt, who, yes, he was great at Tennessee, but hasn't done anything in the NFL and probably won't do anything in the NFL at this point. He can't get open, unfortunately. I'm doing that all day. And then the last one, which I think is a little ridiculous, and I don't know if you can pull this off in your leagues, but it got pulled off here. If there's a guy in your league that loves Jerry Jeudy, I think you can make this happen. Jerry Jeudy and a first for 2026 for Nico Collins. Yes, Nico Collins has some of the same issues that Puka Nacua has, in my opinion, with the injury concerns and the hamstring issue, right? But Nico Collins, when he's on the field, is very consistent, high upside, wide receiver 1 type of talent. I'm doing that all day as well. So if you have a few players in your league that love Jerry Jeudy and really high on him, I would ship him to them for like 2 early seconds like you see here, or maybe even upgrade to like a Garrett Wilson or whoever their wide receiver 1 is. So, yeah, I'm doing that every single day. I think it's time we start talking about Chris Olave as a sell high. I know you see his dynasty value is at an all-time low at the moment, and there's good reason for that. He can't stay on the field, and when he is on the field, he's kind of underwhelming, and he has been underwhelming the past few years. You look at the stat sheet and you see he's got 2,000-yard seasons, 5-6 touchdowns, right? He's the Najee Harris of wide receivers, but he's also injury-prone at this point in his career. He has had multiple concussions, multiple injuries this year. Not his own fault. Derek Carr has been throwing him hospital pass after hospital pass. And you see where he finished this year, the wide receiver 94. He just couldn't get on the field at all. And every time he did, it seemed like the first target, he's getting absolutely smashed by a linebacker or a safety. It's just tough, man. I thought Chris Olave was very talented at Ohio State, and I thought he would make an impact, but the Saints have just really thrown his entire career in the toilet based on these hospital passes and how they utilized him with the quarterback play. So, it's not entirely his fault, but you'll see the type of trades that you can get for this guy at the moment. I'm going to be off of Chris Olave 100% at this point, and I think you'll be kind of surprised with what kind of trades you can get for this guy at the moment. So before we look at the trades, let's go ahead and look at the roster. So Derek Carr is their quarterback. Spencer Rattler is not moving the needle. He showed some flashes of good quarterback play this year, but he didn't really have much to work with, and overall was kind of disappointing. Derek Carr will always be disappointing. And then as soon as you want to move off of him, he's going to have 2 big-time games, and you're going to be like, oh, this guy might be the guy, and then he'll proceed to underwhelm you. That's why he trapped the Raiders for, 10 straight years almost. Looking at the running back room, there's not much to say outside of Alvin Kamara, who gets a good bit of passing volume, so that does take away from Chris Olave a little bit. But they added Brandon Cooks and then Rashid Shaheed, who's been their deep threat, right? So Olave's probably going to be playing the Z/the slot a lot of the times. Brandon Cooks probably plays the Z and slot. They probably intertwine them between Cooks and Olave, and then Rashid's going to play the vertical X role. And then they massively overpaid Juwan Johnson, which kind of confused me a little bit because he hasn't been particularly great on the stat sheet by any means. So there's a decent amount of mouths to feed in this offense between Juwan Johnson, Rashid Shaheed, Brandon Cooks, Bub Means, nobody really. Mason Tipton's another guy that they signed as an undrafted free agent. They really couldn't do anything while they were on the field this year. And then Chris Olave. So I think he could be a focal point in the offense, but with the quarterback play and how abysmal the Saints offense looked this year outside of the first couple weeks, I'm completely off of Olave. I don't think he performs up to par this year. And for what you can get for him right now, I would be shipping him off immediately, because if he has another underwhelming season, you're not going to be able to get anything for this guy. So right now, Chris Olave went for the 111 this year. That's like a Tyler Warren, somewhere in that vein, right? Like, you can definitely get a solid player in this year's class at the 111 all day doing that. Chris Olave for Debo and Isaac Guerendo. Isaac Guerendo is probably one of the best handcuffs you can have this next year in fantasy, because if CMC goes down, Isaac Guerendo is the only guy that they have right now. So, very high upside there. And then Debo Samuel, who's, he's kind of getting a little value increase right now because of the offense he's going into. He's going into an electric offense where I think they're going to utilize him very well if he can stay healthy. So you're getting both of those pieces for Chris Olave. I'm doing that all day. And then Chris Olave in the 205 for Jonathan Taylor, a guy that's going to get a lot of carries next year as long as he can stay healthy. He showed last year that he can hold up outside of, a injury here and there. I'm doing that all day. Chris Olave in the 205 for JT, all day. Doing that all day. So you can see, even though his value is at a all-time low, you're still able to get some decent deals for Chris Olave to the right person. This kind of hurts me a little bit as a Kansas City Chiefs fan. Our next guy here is Rashee Rice. So it's interesting with him. So he finishes the wide receiver 100 this year, but if he would have stayed on pace, if he didn't get hurt this year, I think he would have been a mid to high wide receiver one. He was getting a ton of volume the first couple weeks of the season. But there's a good bit of issues here with him where I think we need to ship him off. One, had a big-time knee injury this year, torn ACL, MCL, and PCL, I believe, for Rashee Rice. So that's going to significantly impact him with how he plays. You know, he's a yak guy. And then people just forget about this. He had a big-time legal problem last season where he had, you know, the hit and run and then they ran away from the cops, right? That suspension is still lingering over his head where he could probably miss a significant amount of time next year, like 8 to 10 game suspension. Now, people could just forget about that and the NFL could just say, no, we're not suspending him. But I would assume that that's what they're going to do. I know last year they didn't suspend him due to, I want to say the court case was still pending or something like that. So I think the court system's going to be finalized in this case before the season starts. So I would cash in. We're looking at a guy that just tore his knee all to pieces. Then you got another suspension lingering over his head that people are just for some reason forgetting about. And you see his value. Over the past year, he has skyrocketed. He's not at his peak yet, but he's still got very solid value. So for me, I'm definitely going to move off of him just based off of the red flags that I'm seeing. And you'll see you can still get some pretty solid trade bundles for Rashee Rice. So looking at the offense, you got Patrick Mahomes as your quarterback. Now, he's been a little underwhelming this past season, right? Just with, I don't know, the offense with Matt Nagy is just not clicking really. But we've seen in the past Patrick Mahomes can be the best quarterback in the NFL for a significant amount of time. The running back room, they don't really have a great running back room. Between Pacheco, who looked like a shell of himself after the leg injury, Kareem Hunt was solid, but more of a goal line back at this point in his career. And then you move on to the wide receivers. Xavier Worthy came on absolutely strong in the playoffs. Later in the year, he had a great year for a rookie, just with how limited he was at the beginning of the year. Then you have Juju Smith-Schuster, who's good for 2 or 3 catches a game. Sky Moore, who is no one at this point. And then you got Hollywood Brown as your deep threat, and Travis Kelce, and Noah Gray. They love to throw to their tight ends. So Rashee Rice is in an offense with a lot of mouths to feed between Hollywood Brown, Travis, Noah Gray, and Worthy. That's a lot of mouths to feed. Now, he will fit in as their slot receiver when he comes back, but I don't know how well he does after the knee injury and all that, so we'll see. Now, looking at some trades, Rashee Rice can get you the 112 at this point in time. I would do that all day, just with the red flags. Now, you could totally be wrong in this, because if he doesn't get the suspension and then just comes back and he's the same Rashee Rice before the knee injury, then yes, I will be wrong. I don't see that happening, and you just look at historical data. Receivers, when they tear their knees all to pieces, on top of being out for a significant amount of time, that rust will develop, and you just won't look as clean as you once did. So then we have Rashee Rice, Joe Milton, and the 208. Joe Milton, like I said, he's getting a lot of hype. I don't see it, right? He had that one game versus a bunch of backups at Week 18 for the Patriots. I just don't see the upside there. He's got way too many problems for me to consider him a starting quarterback. Or DJ Moore, high upside wide receiver 1 in their Chicago Bears offense that under Ben Johnson, he's going to get a lot of work. Josh Downs, who is a very young, up-and-coming slot wide receiver for the Colts. If they can get their QB situation under control, he's still putting up great numbers. I think he had 700, 800 yards and like 6 touchdowns this year. And then you get a 2026 third on top of that. I'm taking that all day. You're basically trading a second in Rashee Rice for DJ Moore and Josh Downs. I think DJ Moore's worth around the early second at this point. Josh Downs is probably worth the early second as well. So, and then you get the third on top of that. Awesome. And then this last one's a little funny. Rashee Rice and Xavier Worthy for CD Lamb. I'm throwing that all day of the week. Give me CD Lamb. I love that. So you can see when Rashee Rice, his value is basically around the early second, late first. If you can get like the 108 to the 112, I'm doing that every single day of the week. I love that value for me, especially with a guy that might not play for an entire year next year. And then you have to hope and pray that his value stays the same, which it will not. The longer he doesn't play, the worse his value is going to be. So you can basically cash in now if you want. Maybe a little controversial here, but our fifth wide receiver is Ladd McConkey. There's a lot to say here. So Ladd McConkey was absolutely fantastic this year, was the wide receiver 12 in an offense that was very run heavy, at least the first 10 weeks of the season. And the last little leg of the season, they were more pass heavy, and Ladd McConkey had a lot of work. There's a few problems here. So one, I would be shocked if they don't go wide receiver in the first 2 rounds, that being the Chargers. And then another thing, at Georgia, Ladd McConkey was banged up all of the time. He was hurt all the time. That's why he went all the way in the second round, because he just didn't have any production at Georgia because he was always hurt. This year, if you were a Ladd McConkey owner, you were a little, scared a lot of weeks because he had a shoulder injury every single week where he was limited in practice every single week. So he is a great, superb wide receiver, a slot wide receiver, but they're going to bring in more help at the receiver position, so his target volume is going to go down. And then as soon as he gets hurt, people are going to do the same thing that they did when he was in college. He gets hurt all the time. He's injury prone. I don't want him. And then if you look at his value, look at it. It's at an all-time high right now. I don't know if he, does this season again, in my opinion. Now, he's coming off of a great playoff game where he went for like almost 200 yards, I think. So, very high upside player, but I think the red flags for me are going to show sooner or later. So, I'm shipping him off. Okay, so looking at the Chargers offensive depth chart at the moment, Justin Herbert as your quarterback you can't ask for much better. He's a top 6 quarterback in the NFL, in my opinion. And then with the running backs, they have Najee Harris, Kamani Vidal. They're going to run Najee Harris into the ground and probably pick up a running back in the 4th to 6th round range. And then when you look at the wide receiver depth chart, they brought back Mike Williams, who's good for maybe a couple big games a year, and then he'll get hurt. Quentin Johnston, who they might be ready to move on from, he still has the drop issue. You see that time after time where he's just dropping easy passes. They probably are going to want to ship him off to another team sooner rather than later. Then you have Ladd McConkey. And then tight ends, you got Will Dissly, Tyler Conklin. They're probably not drafting tight end this year with the Tyler Conklin pickup as well as Will Dissly. Just doesn't really, they don't have any great tight ends, but they'll probably stick with those two, at least for this year. And then you have Ladd McConkey in all of this, who is by far the best player in this offense, outside of Justin Herbert, obviously. But that's a problem, right? Ladd McConkey's good, but if he's your only guy, that's just not going to be enough. So they're going to bring in more help. They'll probably bring in a pass catcher as well from the running back position. So that's all going to take away from Ladd McConkey's overall volume. And like I said, the injury thing's going to pop up sooner or later. He held up a little bit this year, but he was still limited every single week. So moving on to the trades, like I said, I love Ladd McConkey, but some of these picks are just, I can't turn down. Ladd McConkey for the 103, I'm doing that all day because the 103 is more than likely going to be Tet McMillan. I like Tet McMillan. I like where he's going to go more probably because the Chargers is not a great landing spot, at least for the scheme, right? Ladd McConkey made it work, but not in love with it. So I'd rather have Ted McMillan, I think, this year. I'd rather have Luther Burden if he goes to a very good spot. Omarion Hampton is up here. Travion Henderson's in play here. I would take all of those over Ladd McConkey at this point in time. And then Ladd McConkey for the 211 and the 107, a first and a second in a very good draft class. I'm doing that all day. And then Ladd McConkey in the 311 for Garrett Wilson. Massive upgrade, in my opinion, to Garrett Wilson. I would take him every day of the week. You know, Justin Fields at quarterback for Garrett Wilson's, we'll see how that works out, but I think he'll get a lot of work to Garrett Wilson. So, yeah, I'm going to take all of these. Maybe the first and second, the late first and the late second is a little borderline, but I think I'd still take it. So, yeah, that was our top 5 sell-high wide receivers. Obviously, we're going to be doing more of these for buy lows for each position, so stay tuned for those. And we'll just go over these real quick. We got Ladd McConkey at 5, Rashee Rice at 4, Chris Olave at 3, Jerry Jeudy at 2, and Puka Nacua at 1. There's not an order to these, which one you should sell high. I think they're all very solid sell-high candidates at this point in their careers. So, yeah, I mean, if there's anybody you think that we left off of this list, please comment below. I'd love to hear other people's opinions about this. If you think I'm crazy for putting Ladd McConkey on here, I'd love to hear your take on that as well. But thank you guys for watching, and stay tuned for the rest of the videos that's going to be coming out.